Have you ever walked into a place you legally owned, only to be treated like a criminal standing on someone else's land? That was exactly what happened to me the morning I came back to my abandoned mountain house with a truck full of renovation supplies. Before I take you into what happened on that mountain, do one small thing for me. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who enjoys stories where quiet people finally prove they were never weak. I had just parked my truck beside the old stone cabin. The bed was packed with flooring, tools, insulation, and enough supplies to keep me busy for the next few weeks. The mountain air was sharp and clean. The pine trees were moving gently in the wind. For a moment, I felt peaceful. Then I heard gravel crunch behind me. I turned halfway and saw 3 vehicles pulling into my driveway. 2 police cruisers came first. Behind them was a white BMW SUV, shining like it had never touched a dirt road in its life. Before I could even ask what was going on, a woman's voice cut through the air. "Officers, that is him. That is the squatter I told you about." I slowly put down the box I was carrying and turned around. 2 officers stepped out of their cruisers. The woman climbed out of the BMW like she owned the whole mountain. She was in her 50s, with perfect blonde hair, expensive sunglasses, and a designer tracksuit that looked completely wrong in the middle of the woods. She pointed at me like I had broken into a bank. One of the officers stepped closer. "Sir, please move away from the house. We received a report about illegal construction on HOA property." I looked at him, then at the woman, then back at the cabin behind me. "HOA property?" I said. "There must be some mistake. This is my house." The woman laughed, but there was nothing warm in it. "Your house?" she said. "This entire ridge belongs to Pinehurst Estates Homeowners Association. Every inch from the lower road to the peak is protected community land. You are trespassing." She lifted a thick binder in one hand. It was packed with papers, maps, tabs, and plastic sleeves. She looked proud of it, like that binder was the law itself. The younger officer moved closer. "Do you have identification and proof that you own this property?" "Yes," I said. "The deed is in my truck. I have the title, the tax records, and the ownership documents." The woman's smile slipped for half a second, then came back harder. "Anyone can print papers these days," she said. "We have the original HOA covenant from 1987. It clearly shows this mountain as community preserve land." I looked at her carefully. At that moment, I did not know her full story yet. I only knew her name from a few warning notices that had shown up in my mailbox. Margaret Thornfield, president of the Pinehurst Estates HOA. But I could already tell what kind of person she was. She was not confused. She was not trying to solve a problem. She was enjoying herself. She held up her phone and started recording me. "This man has been warned for months," she said to the officers. "He ignored our notices and continued illegal work. We have tried to resolve this properly, but he refuses to cooperate." That was strange, because I had never spoken to her before in my life. Still, I kept my voice calm. "Officers, I will show you the documents. They are in the glove compartment." As I walked toward my truck, I heard Margaret behind me, already talking about cleaning up the eyesore and stopping people from stealing from the community. She thought she had walked onto that mountain with power. She had no idea whose family had owned that land long before her HOA ever existed. To understand why I was there, I need to go back 18 months. I found the property while scrolling through estate sale listings late one night. The title caught my attention right away. "Abandoned Mountain Cabin, Estate Liquidation." The photos were rough. The roof was tired. The deck was half rotten. The windows were dirty. Vines were growing along one side of the house. But beneath all of that, I saw something solid. The cabin had a stone foundation, thick timber framing, and a view that stretched across the valley for miles. It sat on a shelf of granite surrounded by old pine trees. It looked forgotten, but not dead. I drove up the next weekend to see it. The road twisted through the forest for nearly 40 minutes. By the time I reached the cabin, fog was moving between the trees. The place was quiet in a way I had not felt in years. I walked around the house slowly. The front steps were weak. The roof needed work. The inside smelled like dust, old wood, and damp stone. But I could see what it could become. A quiet home. A workshop. A place to breathe. The estate attorney seemed almost relieved when I made an offer. To be honest, he told me, we were not sure anyone would want to take it on. The property was tied up in probate for years, and there have been some issues with the local homeowners association. I should have asked more questions. But the sale itself was clean. The title was clear. The taxes were paid. The deed was valid. The county records matched. I did the inspections, pulled permits, and started planning the renovation. For the first few months, nobody bothered me. I cleared brush, repaired the roof, removed old debris, and made careful plans. I was not trying to build a mansion. I just wanted to restore an old mountain home with respect for the land around it. Then I started hearing about Margaret. My closest neighbor was Jim Morrison, a retired man who lived about a quarter-mile down the mountain. He was 78, moved slowly, and had the calm sadness of someone who had seen too much nonsense from people with too much power. One afternoon, he stopped by while I was fixing the roof. "You had any trouble with Margaret yet?" he asked. I said, "Margaret who?" He looked toward the road like she might appear just because he said her name. "Margaret Thornfield. HOA president. Around here, she thinks she is the mountain." Jim told me Pinehurst Estates had once been a normal subdivision with a normal HOA. They cared about basic things. People kept their yards clean. Houses followed simple standards. Nothing too dramatic. Then Margaret became president. Within a few years, she turned the HOA into a machine of rules, fines, notices, and threats. She created something called the Mountain Preserve Reclamation Project. The name sounded noble, but Jim said it was just a fancy cover for taking control of land that did not belong to her. Her method was simple. She found mountain properties near the subdivision. If they looked old, abandoned, rural, or different from the homes inside Pinehurst Estates, she declared them non-conforming. Then came violation letters. Then fines. Then legal threats. Most people did not have the time, money, or energy to fight. The Henderson family lost their weekend cabin after Margaret buried them in notices and fines. Mrs. Chen, an elderly widow, was forced to sell her family's mountain homestead after Margaret claimed the property was an environmental hazard. A young couple named the Kowalskis were still in court over solar panels Margaret said violated the community's architectural rules. Jim had his own story. Margaret fined him more than $8,000 over a fence that she claimed was too close to the road. Later, he learned the fence had been fully inside his property line the whole time. But by then, he had already paid. The more I listened, the clearer it became. Margaret was not just strict. She was organized. She had forms. Photos. Legal letters. Board votes. Meeting minutes. She knew how to make pressure look official. And her husband owned Thornfield Construction, the company that somehow kept getting HOA contracts for improvement projects and development work. That was when I realized this was bigger than a bossy neighbor. It was a business. I started keeping every letter. Every notice. Every photo. I checked every permit. I spoke with the county. I reviewed my deed again and again. My property was not part of Pinehurst Estates. It was older than the subdivision by decades. Margaret could send as many letters as she wanted. She had no authority over my land. At least, that was what I thought before she showed up with the police. After that first driveway confrontation, I knew she was not going to stop. She had come prepared to embarrass me, scare me, and force me off my own land. 2 weeks later, she returned. This time, she brought 2 HOA board members with her. I was working on the deck when I heard her car door close. Margaret walked up with a folder in her hand and 2 nervous men behind her. She was wearing a business suit, heels, and the same cold smile. "Mr. Davidson," she called, "we need to discuss your continued illegal occupation of HOA preserve land." I set down my hammer. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Thornfield?" She pulled papers from the folder. "This is your official notice of violation and assessment of penalties. You currently owe $15,000 in accumulated fines for unauthorized construction and illegal occupancy." I stared at her. $15,000 for renovating my own house. For illegally occupying HOA property, she said. One of the board members, a thin man with wire glasses, looked uncomfortable. "The fine started when construction began without HOA approval," he said quietly. $500 per day. $500 per day, I repeated. Margaret nodded. "And every day you remain here adds another 500. She handed me the papers like she was serving a royal order. The violations were ridiculous. Unauthorized construction. Improper disposal of materials. Damage to native vegetation. Disruption of drainage. Illegal occupancy. Failure to comply with community standards. I had documentation proving every claim was false. I had disposed of waste properly. I had protected the trees. I had hired an environmental consultant before touching the drainage. I had permits for the work. But Margaret did not care about truth. She cared about pressure. You have 10 days to pay, she said. After that, we will place a lien on the property for the fines, legal fees, and administrative costs. And then what? I asked. If you cannot pay, we proceed with foreclosure. The illegal structure will be removed, and the land will be restored. The second board member shifted on his feet. Margaret continued. We have recovered 4 other properties this way. People always think they can fight community authority. They learn quickly. There it was. She had just admitted the pattern. I stayed calm because I wanted her to keep talking. She pulled out her phone and started recording again. For the record, she said, Mr. Davidson has been informed of his violations and offered the chance to comply voluntarily. What she did not know was that I was recording too. My phone was in my shirt pocket, capturing every word. She thought she was building evidence against me. Really, she was building evidence against herself. After she left, I sat at my kitchen table and read every page she had given me. The language was thick and official. It was designed to frighten people who did not know the law. But I knew the law. I had spent 30 years working in real estate law. That was the part Margaret did not know. I had come to the mountain to retire from exactly this kind of fight. I was tired of courtrooms, property disputes, greedy boards, and neighbors who used rules as weapons. I wanted quiet. Margaret gave me the opposite. The next morning, Jim knocked on my door. He looked serious. I saw her car up here, he said. I figured you should know what she is really doing. He brought a folder with him. Inside were years of notices, fines, letters, photos, and board minutes. Jim had quietly collected evidence from his own case and others. The pattern was almost perfect. Margaret chose a target. She created a violation. She raised the fine. She threatened liens. She offered a way out that usually involved selling, surrendering, or giving control to the HOA. Then Thornfield Construction somehow appeared later. The Henderson cabin. Mrs. Chen's land. 2 empty lots near the ridge. All of them had passed through the same system. Jim's voice shook when he talked about his wife's roses. Margaret said they were non-native plantings, he said. My wife planted those roses before Margaret even moved here. He looked down at his hands. We paid because we were scared. I hate admitting that. But we were scared. I told him there was no shame in being outmatched by someone abusing a system. Then I asked him one question. Jim, would you testify if this goes further? He looked me straight in the eye. Son, I would testify in front of the Supreme Court if it meant stopping that woman. That was when the fight changed. Until then, I had been defending my own property. Now I understood I was standing in the way of a machine that had hurt good people for years. And Margaret had just chosen the wrong person to test. Now, before we walk into the moment where everything explodes in that HOA meeting, take a second and help this story travel. Hit like if you are still watching, subscribe if you want more stories like this, and share it with someone who knows that the quietest person in the room may be the one holding all the proof. A few days later, I drove into town for supplies. I was standing in the hardware store comparing screws when my phone rang. It was Jim. His voice sounded different. Sharp. Angry. Afraid. You need to get back up here right now, he said. Margaret is at your place with a crew. Trucks, equipment, workers. They have chained off your driveway. I left my cart in the aisle and drove up the mountain faster than I should have. When I reached the final bend, I saw it. My driveway was blocked by a heavy steel chain stretched between two concrete posts. A large sign hung from it. No trespassing. HOA property. My stomach tightened. Then I saw the power line. The line I had paid the electric company to install had been cut. It hung loose from the pole. My water connection at the road had been capped with an orange cover. A notice was tied to it. Service terminated. Illegal connection. Margaret's white BMW was parked inside my driveway. Two Thornfield construction trucks sat near the cabin. Workers were installing security cameras on trees around my property. Margaret stood near my porch with a clipboard in her hand. She looked like a general after winning a battle. I parked by the road and walked up to the chain. A construction worker stepped in front of me. Sorry, sir. Private property. You need permission from the HOA office. This is my house, I said. He looked confused. The HOA said nobody is allowed up here. Margaret heard my voice and turned. Mr. Davidson, she called brightly. I was hoping you would arrive before we finished. I pointed at the cut power line. What have you done? We secured preserved land against further illegal use, she said. Your 10-day period expired. You failed to comply. You cut my utilities. We terminated illegal connections. You blocked access to my property. We blocked access to HOA land. She said every sentence like it had already been decided by a higher power. I looked at the cameras. What are those? Monitoring equipment. If you attempt to enter, our security company and local law enforcement will be notified. Then she handed me another notice. It stated that I had 48 hours to remove personal items from the structure. After that, the cabin would be considered abandoned property and subject to removal. Removal? I asked. Margaret's eyes brightened. Demolition. We will tear down the illegal structure and restore the mountain. She was not hiding it anymore. She wanted my land. I asked her how much she claimed I owed now. She smiled. Current restitution is estimated at $45,000. That includes demolition, environmental repairs, legal fees, and administrative costs. Of course, if payment is impossible, we may accept transfer of the deed. There it was. Clean and clear. She did not want compliance. She wanted ownership. I looked at the chain. The cameras. The cut utilities. The fake signs. The workers standing on land they had no right to enter. Margaret thought she had trapped me. But she had just crossed from threats into property damage, trespass, fraud, and attempted theft. So I did the one thing she loved doing. I documented everything. I photographed the chain. The posts. The cut line. The water cap. The workers. The cameras. The signs. The trucks. Margaret watched me, still smiling. You can take all the pictures you want, she said. The board has already approved emergency action. Good, I said. That made her smile fade. The next morning, another notice appeared on the chain. Emergency HOA board meeting. Mandatory attendance. Final resolution of mountain preserve violations. The meeting was set for 7 that evening at the Pinehurst Estates Community Center. Margaret even added a note at the bottom in handwriting I recognized from earlier notices. Failure to attend will result in immediate forfeiture proceedings. I almost laughed. She was inviting me to watch her victory speech. At 6:30 that evening, the parking lot outside the community center was full. Residents had come because they knew something big was happening. Some looked curious. Some looked nervous. Some looked like they were only there because missing a meeting under Margaret's rule could bring another fine. I also saw 2 police cars and a local news van. That was Margaret's style. She did not just want to beat me. She wanted an audience. Inside, the room looked less like a community meeting and more like a courtroom. Margaret sat at a long table in front. The board members were beside her. An attorney sat near them with files stacked in front of her. A projector screen showed a title slide. Protecting Our Mountain Heritage. Under that, it said, the successful reclamation of preserved land. My property was the case study. I took a seat in the back with my briefcase on my lap. At exactly 7, Margaret called the meeting to order. She looked perfect. Navy suit. Pearl necklace. Smooth hair. Calm face. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, tonight we mark an important moment in the protection of our community. She spoke about shared values, environmental responsibility, and protecting the mountain for future generations. If you had never met her, you might have believed her. Then the slides began. The first showed aerial photos of the mountain. My cabin was circled in red and labeled violation site. The next slide showed a timeline. According to Margaret, I had illegally entered protected land, ignored warnings, caused environmental damage, and refused reasonable efforts to resolve the matter. Then came photos of my renovation work. They were carefully selected and misleading. A neat stack of materials was photographed from an angle that made it look like waste. A drainage improvement looked like random digging. A temporary work area looked like destruction. Margaret pointed at the screen. As you can see, the damage is extensive. People murmured. The reporter took notes. Margaret's confidence grew. As of yesterday, she said, the HOA has secured the site. The illegal structure will be demolished within 72 hours, and the responsible individual will be held accountable for all costs. Then her attorney stood. The board is prepared to vote on a resolution authorizing demolition in pursuit of full legal remedies. Margaret smiled and looked across the room. Is there any discussion before we vote? Jim raised his hand. Shouldn't we hear from the property owner? Margaret's smile tightened. Mr. Davidson has had many chances to cooperate. But if he wishes to make a brief statement, the board will allow it. Every head turned toward me. The cameras turned too. This was the moment Margaret wanted. She expected me to stand up, look nervous, and beg for time. Instead, I picked up my briefcase and walked to the front. Thank you, Mrs. Thornfield, I said. I would like to correct a few facts. Her smile stayed in place, but her eyes changed. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the first document. This is a warranty deed dated September 15, 1952. It shows the purchase of 847 acres by James Davidson, my grandfather, from the Appalachian Mountain Timber Company. The room went quiet. Margaret leaned back. Old deeds do not cancel current community rules, she said. No, I replied. But they do establish ownership. I held up the original survey. This survey shows the boundaries of my grandfather's land. Those boundaries include the mountain parcel where my cabin sits. I walked to the screen and pointed to Margaret's aerial map. In fact, the original parcel also included the land that later became Pinehurst Estates. That caused the first real silence of the night. Margaret blinked. That is impossible. It is not, I said. Pinehurst Estates was developed after my family sold part of the land in 1986. This is the development agreement between Pinehurst Development Corporation and the Davidson Family Trust. My family sold 347 acres for the subdivision and retained the 500-acre mountain parcel. The board attorney stopped shuffling papers. The police officers looked at each other. Margaret's face lost color. I pulled out the HOA covenant next. This is the original declaration filed in 1987. It states that the HOA covenants apply only to lots platted and sold within Pinehurst Estates. My property was not platted into the subdivision. It was specifically excluded. That means the HOA has never had authority over it. The reporter's pen moved quickly. Margaret tried to recover. The environmental violations remain serious. Let us talk about those, I said. I showed the county permits. The inspection reports. The environmental assessment. The approved drainage plan. My work was permitted. My waste disposal was documented. The trees were protected. The drainage work improved erosion control. The environmental claims made by Mrs. Thornfield were based on misleading photographs and false descriptions. Then I connected my phone to the projector and showed my own photos. Clean work areas. Marked permits. Protected trees. Stored materials. Proper disposal receipts. The room began to shift. People stopped looking at me and started looking at Margaret. I continued. Mrs. Thornfield filed reports with county agencies claiming the HOA owned or controlled land it has never owned. She had no authority to block my driveway, cut my utilities, install cameras, or threaten demolition. One officer began writing notes. Then I opened Jim's folder. This is not an isolated mistake. I have documentation from multiple families who were targeted with false or exaggerated violations, including the Henderson family, Mrs. Chen, the Kowalskis, and Jim Morrison. Jim stood in the audience. It is true, he said. I paid more than $8,000 for violations that were later proven false. Another voice rose. She fined us for landscaping that had been there for years. Then another. She threatened a lien over a mailbox. Another resident stood. She made us pay for an inspection by a company connected to her husband. The room came alive. For years, people had been afraid alone. Now they realized they had all been living under the same threat. Margaret banged the gavel. Order. This is not relevant. It is completely relevant, I said. Because the same pattern was used against me. False authority. Manufactured violations. Escalating fines. Threats of liens and foreclosure. Then a demand for money or property. I looked directly at her. That is not community protection. That is a land grab. The attorney leaned close and whispered into Margaret's ear. Margaret's hands tightened around the gavel. I placed the deed on the table. You cut power to private property. You blocked legal access. You installed cameras without permission. You filed false reports. You threatened to demolish a home the HOA does not own and has no legal power over. The police chief, who had entered during the meeting, walked toward the front and looked at the documents. His expression was serious. Mrs. Thornfield, he said, we need to speak with you about those filings and the property damage reports. Margaret looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. How? She whispered. I kept my voice calm. Simple. I actually own the land you tried to steal. The meeting did not end with a vote. It ended with police collecting statements, the reporter speaking into the camera, board members distancing themselves from Margaret, and residents lining up to tell their stories. Margaret had come there to destroy me in public. Instead, she destroyed herself. One last pause before the ending. If this story has kept you here until now, give the video a like, subscribe for more powerful property stories, and share it with someone who believes that real justice sometimes starts with one person refusing to be bullied. The investigation moved quickly after that night. Once the county reviewed the filings, they found serious problems. Margaret had submitted claims about land the HOA did not own. She had used selective photos to support environmental complaints. She had sent violation notices through the mail demanding money based on false authority. That brought in federal investigators. Mail fraud. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. Property damage. Attempted theft. Margaret's greatest weakness was the same thing she had once considered her strength. She documented everything. Every letter. Every threat. Every fine. Every official notice. Every board vote. She had built the paper trail that proved her own scheme. Her husband was pulled into the investigation too. Thornfield Construction had received contracts connected to properties Margaret had pressured owners to surrender or sell. Money had moved through the HOA in ways nobody could explain cleanly anymore. The board collapsed within weeks. An emergency election replaced every member who had supported Margaret or looked the other way. The new board's first action was a public apology to every family harmed by the old leadership. Their second action was to cancel every enforcement matter tied to Margaret's false preserve claims. The Henderson family got their cabin back. Mrs. Chen received a settlement large enough to buy a comfortable home closer to her grandchildren. The Kowalskis got their solar panel fines refunded, and the new board later changed the rules to support responsible renewable energy. Jim received full restitution for the money he had paid, plus interest. The day I handed him the check, his hands shook. He did not say much. He just looked at the number, folded the paper carefully, and wiped his eyes. "My wife would have liked this day," he said. My own settlement covered the damage Margaret had caused. The power line was repaired. The water was restored. The cameras were removed. The chain came down. The fake HOA signs disappeared. The amount Margaret had demanded from me, $45,000, was almost exactly what her side ended up paying me for the damage and illegal interference. That part felt poetic. 3 months later, I sat on my restored deck as the sun dropped behind the ridge. The cabin looked different now. The old boards had been replaced. The windows were clean. The stone fireplace had been repaired. Warm light glowed from inside. For the first time since buying the place, it felt like mine without a shadow over it. Jim walked up the path carrying a bottle of good whiskey and wearing the biggest smile I had ever seen on him. "Final word came today," he said. Margaret took the plea deal. We sat on the deck while he told me. 5 years in federal prison for Margaret. 3 years for her husband. Full restitution to the families they had harmed. Jim shook his head. All those letters she sent. All those notices. She thought paperwork made her untouchable. It made her traceable, I said. He laughed at that. Then he looked at me with curiosity. "I never asked what you did before you came up here." I reached into my wallet and handed him a business card. Davidson and Associates. Real estate law. Property rights and HOA disputes. Jim stared at it, then burst out laughing. "You are a lawyer." "Retired," I said. "Not anymore," he replied. He was right. After the news story spread, calls started coming in from other property owners. People from nearby counties. People dealing with abusive boards, false fines, crooked enforcement, and threats they did not understand. I had come to the mountain to escape that work. But sometimes life does not let you retire from the thing you are meant to do. The case also led to something bigger. State legislators introduced new protections for property owners facing HOA enforcement abuse. Independent review. Limits on retaliatory fines. Stronger rules around liens. Clear penalties for boards that claim authority they do not have. Margaret had tried to steal one mountain house. Instead, she exposed a problem that reached far beyond one mountain. I walked to the edge of my deck that evening and looked down at the lights of Pinehurst Estates. For years, those people had lived under fear. A notice on the door. A fine in the mail. A threat they could not afford to fight. Now the neighborhood was quieter in a different way. No violation patrols. No fake preserve claims. No families whispering about who would be targeted next. At my gate, the HOA sign was gone. In its place was a simple wooden marker. Davidson Property. Established 1952. I thought about my grandfather, James Davidson, signing that deed more than 70 years earlier. He probably believed he was buying land for the future of his family. He could not have known that one day, that same deed would stop a corrupt HOA president from taking homes away from innocent people. But I like to think he would have smiled at how it ended. Because some people mistake silence for weakness. They think if you do not shout, you cannot fight. They think if you stay calm, you must be afraid. They think paperwork and titles and expensive suits can cover the truth forever. Margaret Thornfield believed all of that. She believed she owned the mountain because people had been too tired, too scared, or too broke to prove otherwise. But the mountain never belonged to her. And the day she brought police to my driveway, called me a squatter, cut my utilities, chained my gate, and tried to demolish my home, she did not just pick a fight with one quiet man. She picked a fight with 70 years of records, a room full of victims, and the truth. That is a hard thing to beat. Especially when the quiet man has the receipts.